And it's going to take 1 more second for everything to get going. Sure, that should be working. All right. Welcome everyone to Rochester Xamarin. It's May 6, 2020. And before we get started with our presentation, I would like to thank our sponsors. The .NET Foundation provides us the meetup.com account, so all of you guys can come and find us. And my company, File on Q, provides us the online meeting tools. Oh, you guys can't see that because I didn't hit the play button. There we go. I always struggle with technology. If you're first time here, I always struggle with PowerPoint and GoToMeeting. It's just a thing. So yeah, like I was saying, .NET Foundation provides us the meetup.com account, and so you guys can all find us. And my company, File on Q, provides us the GoToMeeting subscription free of charge, so we can provide this online and available for everyone that wants to attend anywhere in the world, which is great. All right, so today we have a very exciting presentation. We have Vincent Una. I think I didn't pronounce it right. I'm really sorry. I tried getting it. Vincent is a developer from Nigeria. Thank you so much for being up so late to be able to do the presentation. I think it's almost midnight his time. He's going to be talking to us about building Xamarin.Forms interfaces at runtime. So being able to change it without recompiling the app. Super, super cool. I was talking to him before, and I'm really excited for this. I say it every time. I'm always excited for the next presentation. So without further ado, Vincent, I'm going to give you a screen, and you could start presenting when you are ready. And I know I mentioned before the recording, I'm mentioning it again right now. If you have questions, please just put them in the chat, and I will. I'll stop Vincent when it's an appropriate time. I don't want 30 microphones open all at once. All right, Vincent, you can go and take it away.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Vincent Mwanda. I'm a software engineer. I'm currently working in Nigeria. I run my own development shop. I work for people in Europe and the US, Australia, some clients in Nigeria and other places. So today I'll be talking about building Xamarin.Forms user interfaces at runtime. So sometime in 2019, I had to do a project for a client where so their data collection firm. So this is the Africa's largest offline distribution network, and they have this site that you can go on their site and create a form using the form builder. So just think SurveyMonkey or Google Docs, same thing. So you create your form how you want it to be, what information you need to collect. But the trick then is you don't go about collecting this information yourself. So this company has field agents in all the nook and crannies of Africa, in all the African countries, basically. So what you do then is you simply create your form and deploy it to their devices, and their agents go out and get this data for you. Some of the clients include the World Health Organization, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and these people use this company to monitor their projects in African countries. So they want to know how are the aids they're sending to these hospitals being used. So they create a feedback form on the site, and they have people, these agents, go to really remote areas to collect this information. So that's the basic gist. Now, the problem I had to solve for them then was how to render these forms on a mobile device. And we have most of these agents using really low-end devices. And so we had to make a mobile application that could both render those forms at runtime and at the same time be very performant and basically run on low-end devices. So that was a challenge. Before I continue, I'd like to just demo what we're working through. I have an emulator here. And I have a version of the app so the code I'll be showing here today has been changed. It's not the final code that went to production. This is what I can share. So I have a sample app I built here. Just let me know if you can see my end. I think my emulator is a bit slow today. Okay, so here. Okay, so yeah, I guess. Can you see my emulator now? Yeah, so okay. So I have an emulator here, and I have two forms. So these forms have been created on the form builder on the server. And the way it works is the server then, the mobile application pulls the JSON representation of the form from the server, and then that JSON has to be rendered here. So the form name and all of that. I'm just going to go into this form, and let's see what's there. And so it shows the number of questions with the form, and then an optional welcome message, and I can decide to create a new record. It goes into the JSON, and then it parses that JSON, and based on the representation of the JSON, it creates this user interface. Now, the typical way to do user interfaces in Xamarin is to define it in XAML before you compile your app and all of that. Or in this situation where we have different kind of controls, so there's a lot of text controls here, but there are also other types of controls. For example, there's a radio button. Other forms can have a file picker because yes, you can decide to send back a file with a form. You can take pictures. You can even collect signatures. I'm going to go back and I'll open up this form. I'll also create new record here too. And then the interesting thing is, so this form had to allow conditions to, so say you fill X here, then you should be able to fill Y there. Or if you say no to this question, then you shouldn't get this question. And here I'm going to open this. This is a picker. And do you want to be interviewed? So I'm going to say yes. And what then happens, it displays the rest of the question. So this happens dynamically. And I can collect signature here. I can even take a picture. And if I switch this to no, what happens is those questions go away, and this can just be submitted. And because these people are working in places where the internet connection isn't really good, sometimes they can even go a whole day without having a connection until they come back to the main towns before they have a connection. So we allow them to save those records. And it's saved there, and it syncs back to the server in real time. One thing I didn't show here is that these forms needed to be able to have forms within themselves. So I'm going to say yes here, and this is a form within a form, which starts to get pretty complex real soon. So I should be able to attach a form to this. And my intent, I'm going to say yes, and I will save. And I have a submission within this form. A use case for this would be you're going to a hospital, you take the hospital name, the address of the hospital, and then you wanting to take the detail for each patient in the hospital. So you would have this repeatable form here to take details of each, which then becomes a part of the larger form. So that's basically it. Returning to my slides, let's see the agenda. So that was the introduction of what we'll be working through. That's the demo I did. And then let's talk about passing the JSON that comes from the server to these controls that we saw on the screen. The JSON comes to the phone and the format we see here. So I have a better picture, but it's basically like this. So this is a standard request ID and all of that that comes from the server. And then I have an array of forms, which are the two forms we saw on the mobile app. I have a name here. I have a title. The title we saw displayed here. So I have the title here. And then the meat of the JSON really is this form JSON. So we put the entire representation, the questions, the triggers, the conditionals, all of that are contained in this JSON. And I'm not going to go into the details of how we formed the JSON or any of that, because really you can decide to use whatever format you want, as long as you're passing it correctly on the mobile application end. I think I have a clearer image of it here, and you can see I have fields here. So this is one form, and I have an array called fields, which are the controls you see. So those are the input elements. So for example, I have a question here which is, what is your TIN? TIN is tax identification number in Nigeria. So this renders the question, and the way I tell my application what kind of information I need to collect there is I use this field type called number. So I have field types on all of my fields, and then there's a field type called radio. So I know I'm to render a radio control, and I have field types called drop down and the rest. Let us look at some code. How do we go from this JSON then to those controls on the screen, and how do we do it efficiently? Now, I'm not saying the code we have here is the most efficient, or there's a million ways you could do this, but this is what we did. And this is what works. We had some performance tests, and it scaled pretty well, at least for our use case. So coming to the code now, what we did, I have a lot of folders here. What we did is we broke down we kind of modularized everything. And I have a folder here called controls. And each of these controls represents the kind of inputs that can be collected, or one kind of input that can be collected. So I have a cascade here. I have a checkbox. I have an image, I have a long text, a paragraph, short text, signature, and all of that. And the signature part I showed you was rendered by this signature and the short text. And the short gist is I have a stack layout, which is a bindable stack layout. So in this folder, there's a custom element. I don't know if Xamarin has a bindable stack layout now, but at the time we did this project, there was no bindable stack layout. So we had to extend stack layout to make it bindable. And making it bindable means we could then bind it to an observable collection of content views. And then we could just slide in these content views and slide them out as we needed. So every content view had a position on the screen. And then depending on what selection the person or our user makes, we're simply just removing them from a collection and adding them to a collection, and our views will update in real time. I'm going to use a short text as an example here. So the short text is really a content view. And at the end of the day, we're just putting content views on our screen. Now, what we did is, because in the mobile application, you can save a record and come back to editing it later. And the way we achieve that is to make sure that everything a control needs to function is self-contained within it. I'm going to go to services now. I have a JSON parser class here. And this class does most of the heavy lifting for the transformation for JSON to the controls. I have from here, what this really just do is it takes the initial representation of the JSON and it converts it to a form model. So I have a form model here. If I go to the definition form model, we see that I have name, title, and then a list of fields. Let's see what field looks like. So for field, I have field title, field name, but the important thing here is the field type. So the field type tells me what control I should show on the screen for this particular JSON snippet. Returning to the JSON parser, you see that I am calling pass form here, and I am switching on the field type. So what we're doing here is that if the field type is a checkbox, I give the checkbox control everything it needs to render itself. So I just pass in the field title, the ID, I pass in some triggers and some constraints and all of that. And I just pass it into the control, and that's it. The control then knows how to construct itself, basically. It knows how to build itself. That way, I don't have to worry about the probably rendering all the controls from a central place, or it's the control created, all of that. I just create the control, all of the controls there, and as I create them, I add them to a list of controls, which I return to the page model or the view model, as some people prefer, which I'm doing here after these controls are created. And that really is a simple gist of the whole thing. So these controls are returned to my record start page model, and all fed to the observable collection of controls. And this is the controls that is bound to the view. I don't know if people get me, or someone has questions or wants clarifications. Exactly, yes. Okay. Okay. Let's look at, so the key components really in this application is the bindable stack layout. So that enables us to basically put things and remove self-contained controls, allows us to construct these controls and then not having to worry about them individually. The application relies heavily on Xamarin messaging service. So if you noticed, when I created a new submission, the UI updated. So it shows submission as one. If I submit another one, you see I have 2 submissions and 3 submissions and all of that. That is because within the controls, I am actually using Xamarin.Forms messaging a lot. I think this is really slowing down my computer. Okay, so this is a short text control. And I have a list of triggers here that I'm always listening for. So these triggers are hooked up to this messaging center. And then if the visibility of this control changes, it's what kind of broadcast to all other controls, and it says, hey, my visibility has changed. Does anyone need to do something with that? And then all the other controls are listening. And then per the JSON structure, the JSON can say, hey, if the first name visibility goes off, then there's no point entering the last name. And that really is what happens here. So this just broadcasts all the controls that kept listening, and it says, my visibility has changed. Do you need to do something with that? And then based on that information, others can, for example, I'm subscribing to notifications from content view here with this field ID. And so if someone broadcasts with the field ID for this control, I simply come in here and I either change the visibility, I either make it visible if it was not visible before, or I set it to false. And that's all that happens here. And then there's a text change. So what happens, I know it's usually frowned upon to put code in your code behind. Well, I think this situation, it was actually easier for us to kind of contain this code in the code behind. So that way we have one-to-one mappings with the elements in the actual XAML. And then what happens when you change the text is we simply put the text in there, set the results, make it ready for the database, and then we send off a notification that, hey, this text has changed, so someone needs to listen to it, someone needs to do anything with it. And that is how this part works. We have some checks. But the way we kind of put all this together is we have an interface here, which is called IUI control. And it really it tells everything a control needs to have. So a control should be able to clear results, it should be able to set results. So set result is called when we're rendering back from the database. I'll try to start up my emulator again to show that. So when we have data coming back from the database into a control, we pass it into the set result value. We have a result valid value, which is called when we try to result valid method or property rather, which is called when we try to save a record to a database. Then there's the actual results, there's a field ID, there's a position. So it's important to keep track of the position, because what we noticed with the stack layout was our controls were then being entered at random positions. So we say yes to a question and we expect a new control to pop up right under that. But probably because we've said yes a number of times, or we've had other triggers, we had to introduce a position which clearly defines which position this control is supposed to be at. So what then happens is when we go to control on the screen, we actually check for the position. And once I remember correctly right now, I think that happens in the Forms tab model. Let's see. Thank you. I'm just having issue with the slowdown. I don't know what exactly is slowing down my system here. Yeah, it's probably Docker or something, or my database. Or okay. So what we're waiting for is to clear up that's the general architecture. Another issue we had to tackle was the data. So the issue with the internet. So because we have these people going to villages and all that to collect this data, we had to figure out a way to actually keep this data. For that, we're using SQLite. So SQLite worked very well in this situation. We just bundle the information. I have a compression service which takes all of that string and just really compresses it, and that is what is sent to the server. I just need a reference to this. Okay, so I have it here, this bit of code. So this bit of code that is responsible for putting those controls on the screen and removing. So what's happening here is this is really just listening for the visibility change for controls, and it's accepting the control as a sender. So I just I get the control here, and then I check if the control is visible, or if it's just set to visible, I insert it at the position it's supposed to be, and if I remove a blank control. So the problem with inserting and removing controls from the screen is that you can run into index out of range exceptions. It's something I noticed with the observable collections. We weren't able to, I wasn't able to track down that bug. The way we solved that was when we remove a control from the screen, we put a blank control there. So just in case anyone has those issues, it took me a couple of weeks to figure out a way around, but I realized that the list shrinks dynamically. So what happens then is when we remove a control from the screen, we don't exactly leave that position blank. There's a control, we created a new control called the blank control, which we insert at its position. So each time we insert a new control, we actually remove that blank that was there. So it frees up that index, and then we stop having things like index out of range or inserting controls above controls that they're not supposed to be at the top of. And that solves the issue. So that's why we have a blank control. It's a viable solution for anyone having issues around there. And that really is it. Okay, we had triggers. So you see the reaction you saw on with the controls where certain controls were able to cause certain controls to appear or disappear. That was our triggers working. So the way we implemented triggers, it's the thing with the app is it's really simple to grasp. If I can open up the trigger class here, it's really unfortunate that my system is having this slowdown. I wanted to open the trigger class. It's just takes in what control it's supposed to affect, what actions it should take on that control, and it's simple. And what we focused on in the app really is simplicity. It's just really easy to see how everything ties together, what is going on here at any point in time, and any developer can just jump on the code without too much knowledge sharing or onboarding and just get it. What I was hoping this was going to be like was I was hoping it was going to be more like a conversation thing where I said, okay, this is how we did this, and maybe someone asked, okay, why didn't you do it this way? Or, okay, this could have been a better way to do this, kind of the conversation kind of thing. For the app itself, it's not, I mean, as we can say, it's not too complex, an app. And that really is it, Andrew. I don't know if anyone wants any areas they want me to drill into.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for being able to do the presentation. I was wondering if you could show us that stack layout that you were mentioning earlier. That was kind of like your bindable layout, where because I kind of missed or didn't fully understand where the views were actually being injected in. Are you using like a XAML view, C# view? How's that part working?
Okay, so give me a second here. So what really happens here is, so I actually have it in the content view. So I'm going to show the code once it can come up. You know what, I'll just show this with VS Code. It's light. Yeah, so I have a bindable stack layout here. I don't know if you can see the code.
Yes, we could see the code.
So I just added a new bindable property to it, which is the items property, and this is just standard observable collection code here. And the only cases I'm really handling is the insert and the remove. Right? I'm not doing anything with the move and the replace. And what happens is I coded it to listen to accept my interface. So I have the interface, which is the IUI control, and this is what I can put in there. And then I'm using the position we talked about earlier to really insert it in certain points in the stack layout. And that's it. And then how it translates to the view then is I have a view folder here. So I like to call my content pages, and then my content views. Most people prefer to call the content pages. Content pages views, and then I have a home view here. I have custom elements bindable stack layout here, and this is what I bind my controls to. This is the screen you see here. So this screen with the surname and all of the rest, that's what you see here, really. And that's really just it. Now, any control, controls collection, just pops up here. And that's the simple gist. Does that clarify, or is there something discussion?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thanks for showing that. That kind of filled the gaps that I had. Ryan has a question from the chat about where do you go from here? So this is really cool. We got a couple statically defined controls that we could insert into any application. But if I wanted to go and create a new control after the app's been compiled, I know it's not necessarily part of your presentation, but if you were to attack that type of problem, how would you start in being able to define different controls dynamically after it's been built?
To answer your question, you say, suppose you need a new kind of control. Are you asking that we need to add, are you asking if we need to add a control after the app has been built?
Yeah, so your app's been built and you already have a handful of controls defined. If you were to support a new feature where you needed to be able to create a dynamic control, so let's say I had a control, let's say I wanted to create a new control that I didn't support. Let's say you didn't have signature support in the beginning and you wanted to add signature support. What would you advise anyone on the call here to try and add different controls after you've already gone through this? Like, how would you kind of support that? Ryan, feel free to open your mic to clarify your question here.
Okay, can you just ask Terry? Okay, so I'll just explain based on what I understand from what you're asking. So if I need to add a new kind of control, I actually have to come into the app And so the point of building this UI is that runtime, it means we're not sure what's going to show up on the screen. We just have to prepare for it. And if we, hello? And if we need to add a new control, we need to come into our app and basically add that control to our XAML here. We actually have to come into the app and create a control type for that control and basically define how it's going to handle, what kind of value it should expect, and all of that. And so we do have to come into the app and add the control here.
Ryan's having a little technical problems. He's going to rejoin so he can open his mic and ask the question again. Does anyone else have any other questions for Vincent on anything that he's gone over here? All right. Well, I'm going to quiz everyone next session then, since no one's got any questions. So, looks like Ryan just got back. Ryan, feel.
The support for bindable layouts and the new version of Xamarin.Forms. Okay, yeah. And I get your question now. I just opened the chat. I just so yeah, that's a possibility. We can decide to send all of that from the server, but the reason we can't do that now is we're already sending a lot of JSON, which so I mean, in the United States that wouldn't be a problem because you have the fast internet and the bandwidth and all of that. But working down here, we're kind of mindful of how much data we're sending down to the application and how much of the mobile data is actually eating up. So sending the entire control from the server is actually going to be a huge payload. So we do as much as we can on the mobile application.
All right, I got a couple other questions coming in from Dylan. He was asking, did you measure the performance of how these controls are being rendered, and was it the same or comparable to standard controls that are created?
It's not the same. I mean, we're moving around a lot of objects here and doing a lot of measuring calls and all of that. Well, we really didn't do any in-depth performance tests, not only tools. What we did was mostly user tests. So we had actual people who use these applications for a couple of days, see if they felt any lag or any of that. And we did not have any of those issues. So the tests we did. And even in the emulator, we see that the performance of the controls going off and on, it's not, even running it in in an emulator with my slowed down system and all of that, it's still decent. It's pretty fast. It's not noticeable for a user on the device, so that's no problem.
Yeah, I'll echo that. When I did a similar solution to this, the performance is negligible from the user. It is more complicated, but these techniques are not really. You're not really going to take a performance at doing it, no more than you would by binding data to a view model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with Satosh. So he's saying using dynamic form control would, yeah, it definitely would decrease the performance. I mean, so this app was actually a rebuild of an app they wrote in Ionic, and they were actually rendering everything from the server, which was really, really slow, especially for forms where they start to have 50 to 100 questions. So they had the form with 100 questions, which was basically, it made the application unusable. But we tested this application with 150 questions, 200 questions, and it still had really decent performance.
Cool. Any other questions? Anyone want to see any of the code again before we head over to group time? Going once. Go. One more. Okay. One more from Ryan.
Okay.
I'll give him a second to type it up, or feel free to open your mic.
Collection view. So at the time we wrote this app, I don't think either collection view was still experimental or it wasn't available at all. Well, I really haven't taken a look at that option, but thinking about it now, no, we really did not. So I'll have to look at it, see if a collection view works here. At the time, there was no collection view for Xamarin.Forms, and that's why we had to do the bindable stack layouts. And so it wasn't a this or this situation there. And honestly, we haven't gotten around to updating the app with the latest features since then. Now that I know that Xamarin has its own bindable stack layout, it's way more performant than what we have here. So I would definitely look at updating it.
And just to add on to that, this similar techniques this will work with the collection view, but as you said, it wasn't around then. So the next question I got coming in is about the JSON. So when you're building these forms, are you building all those JSON payloads out by hand, or did you have another tool that you used to help you generate that JSON for the app to do something with?
Oh, the JSON that comes from the server. So there's a web there's a form builder built on React. So that form builder generates this. So it's a drag and drop form builder, just the way you would use Google Forms. So you drag in a text field and you name it first name, you drag something in and you name it, and then that form builder generates this JSON and sends it down to us. Unfortunately, I don't know if I can show you the form. I don't think I can show you the form builder now. I don't remember the link to it. But it's not hand generated. It all comes from a form builder.
All right, I think that's a solid answer. It comes from the form builder. If anyone's trying to implement this on themselves, they would have to have some type of tool that would generate that for them. The next question that I got coming in is, can you show us how you're handling the click event of the dynamically generated controls?
Okay, so each control has its own events. So for example, let's look at the checkbox. So I have a checkbox code bind file here. And let's see what a relevant piece of code here. So for the checkbox, the relevant event to listen for is a check changed. So when you check, we can render say controls for checkboxes for do you want ice cream, or to yes or no, right? So when you change to yes, this is fired, or when you change to no, this is fired. And what happens when this gets fired is that I get the checkbox that you clicked, and then I get the index of the particular checkbox. I get the selected value. So I get the text box typically has a display value and a value behind. So the display value can be yes, and then the actual value can be 1 or 0, just the same way you define checkboxes in HTML to have a display value and actual value. So I get the value, and then I set it to result or whatever. So this is for checkbox. I'm listening for a check change event here. Yeah, so this actually has more than one checkbox, and that's why you say I don't know if I have any form with the checkbox. My emulator has closed down again. So this is actually handling for more than one checkbox. Up here, I have, let's see. So I have checkboxes. So this control displays more than one checkbox. And I just add all of those checkboxes to a checkboxes property. And then this event actually fires anytime either of them is hit. And then I have to find out, okay, so which of the checkbox did this person click on? And then I proceed to get the value of that checkbox. So this handles for multiple checkboxes. I'm going to try to open a Visual Studio and actually open the app, see if I can put like an image to what you said. And then let's look at the code behind for drop down. So the event we listen to for a drop down is a friend. So for drop down, we're listening for selection change, and then we can just get the selected item. We get the send, and then we get the selected item, and then we can do whatever we want to do with it. If it has to send out a trigger, it does, and at the end of it all, we just put it in our database. For the I think the file probably for the file, there's a select file button, and what happens is we're using a plugin here, James Magnus plugin, and we just pop up the file opener with the file formats we want to open. So those file formats come from the server too, and then we get the file. Here we check that the length of the file, the size of the file is actually within range for the file size that we're defining, and this file size comes from the server too. So the user can say, hey, I don't want the file beyond the size, and we check, and if it's too large, we simply display a message. If not, we simply save the file path. So for this one, we're saving the file path, and when we're ready to sync to server, we get the file using this file path, and then we process it, we compress it, and we send it to the server. Okay, thanks. I got the idea now. All right.
Cool. Well, thanks for that answer. If anyone's got any other questions, we'll take those in group time. I'm going to take a presentation back over from you.
All right.
And we'll finish up here and stop the recording. My self-presenter and share. All right. Thanks again for coming and doing the presentation tonight. I really appreciate you staying up late. I know it's super late your time. And before we jump into group time, I usually announce our next meeting. A quick question into the chat room for people that are here. I was thinking of trying to hold a virtual attendee party for Microsoft Build that's coming up later this month. But I realized that'd be kind of difficult with it all being virtual. So I was thinking of maybe we could have our group get together in the evening after the United States time airing, probably the East Coast airing. I haven't seen the schedule yet, but if people are interested in getting together and just chatting about some of the announcements and stuff going on with Microsoft Build, drop a note in the chat. It's something I'm thinking of doing later this month. If we don't do that, we're looking at a presentation towards like the last week of this month, or we'll be doing one in the beginning of June. But keep an eye on the meetup and the Twitter, and you'll see an announcement for what's happening next for us. Again, Vincent, thank you so much for coming. I'm going to stop the recording here, and we're going to break into group time. So thanks again. This was a great session.